Thanks for joining us. I am Arthur Lewis, the creative director of UTA Artist Space, and welcome to In Conversation with Jill and Eva. This is really very cool. So I'm
So
going to tell you
cool.
a little bit about these amazing humans, and we're going to start our conversation. So I almost feel like Jill doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to do one anyway. Jill is the creator of Transparent. She created one of my very favorite characters on TV and explored his story in a beautiful way. That's David Fisher from 6 Feet Under. I was obsessed with that show and obsessed with David and all things great. Jill is an Emmy winner and just extraordinary. And then our star of the hour, Eva, is an artist that I discovered, and Eva doesn't know this, so she's hearing this for the first time, at the Santa Monica Museum auction. And you were able to go into a room and buy like an 8x10 work. And my partner and I saw your work and took it home. And then Jill, I got to meet Jill at Freeze, which we'll talk about in a sec, and was introduced by Lisa Stein and Michael Sherman, a dear friend of mine. And Eva was standing there and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm a big fan of yours. And Eva basically was like, what are you talking about? So Eva also was part of an exceptional show called Variations and Conversations around Abstract Painting, curated by Franklin Sermons. That was actually like just incredible, and is collected by LACMA and MoCA. And it's really an honor to have you here. And we're really celebrating her latest project with us, which is her artist project on UTA Artist Space. So please make sure you check that out. And the big surprise for all of you is that Eva will be doing a solo presentation with us at UTA in 2021. So Eva, Jill, welcome. And we're gonna start this in the best possible way. And I'd like to just talk about how you guys met each other. Like what sparked this amazing friendship that you have?
Yeah. Jill, you want me to go first, Eva? Should I tell the story of that fateful night?
Yes, please.
Okay, good. Well, it was shortly after He Who Shall Not Be Named 45 was elected. It was about a week after. We were all super depressed. And the Women's Center for Creative Work, which is one of the most fantastic artist organizations in Los Angeles, was throwing a fundraiser at my house. And I was upstairs in my room, like with my head under the pillow going, there's going to be about 250 people downstairs in 10 minutes. And we thought Hillary Clinton was going to be president, and I want to die. And I walked downstairs and started mingling and met this group of artists. Eva is one of them, but there were 5 of us, 6 of us: Lauren Bond, Galia Lynn, Alexandra Grant, Erin Kellgren. Who am I forgetting? Anybody? That's it.
Lord.
And Lauren Chaffee, and we wrote a manifesto, a woe manifesto. We decided on that night that we were going to, topple the patriarchy, like I'm always trying to inspire people to do. But more importantly for me, I was part of this group of artists, and we sort of became a little coven of artists. And for me, kind of moving out of my identification as a showrunner and a director and saying I'm an artist. One of the things I do is make movies. One of the things I do is make TV shows. But to identify as an artist with this group of people was my way out of the reality. I'm an artist. And Eva and I just became fast friends. I was instantly captivated by her. We started talking that night and haven't stopped. And, one of the most amazing things about Eva is she seems like a truly innocent, soul from Bulgaria. But she is one of the most brilliant people you'll ever talk to. You're one of the most brilliant people I know, Eva. And to put it simply, a lot of times I'm having conversations with you and I'm having a sensation when we're talking, which is, what is this sensation? And it's being in the presence of somebody who has such a brilliant mind, who can articulate gigantic ideas and synthesize them into really clear emotional truth, with a ton of pieces that all resonate. And your painting, your life, your talking, who you are, you're a prism in a way for a way of seeing the world. And I just feel so lucky that everybody who's watching today gets to really meet not only you, but your amazing mind.
Oh, wow, guys. What an introduction. Well, I mean, that night for me was also, you know, one of those moments when you're standing, like you're all kind of like dressed up, but you know, not really. And you're standing in the front door of your house, and you're like, really? I'm gonna go out? I shouldn't go out. But I had promised. I had promised my friend Irene, who is closely involved with this place, and you know, I didn't know really what to expect. And then I showed up, and all of a sudden I looked around, and there were so many people from all of these different fields. Like there were some, you know, actors that sort of I barely recognized. And all of a sudden I had this feeling of like, wow, there's so many people, so much energy, and so much like, I don't know, possibility. And I actually felt comfortable meeting new people, which was, you know, which is a kind of a anomaly in our sort of stilted social life in Los Angeles. I mean, maybe there's some people from other places listening to this, but you know, Los Angeles is like, you go somewhere with your tribe and you stay with your tribe. You never meet anybody new. That's forbidden. And there I was, like, just meeting people. It was crazy. I came home, I was like, wow, what just happened? And as Jill said, like, it was a very fast friendship, so much conversation, so much possibility. And for me personally, as I got to know Jill, and I was going through like a huge transition in my own studio, in my own work, where I had finally found a place where I was ready to just ditch the boundaries. And so much of what Jill talks about is, you know, this question around boundaries. And I was ready to ditch the rectangle and let go of the framework that painting has existed for centuries, and open it up and dive like full on into this world of tapestries, you know, painting with my whole body. And so there was something about like our conversations that lended words to what I was experiencing in the studio in a really interesting way. So I, you know,
I love that, Eva. I think what's really amazing is that when you encounter the two of you together, you're like quite the tag team, because within like 30 seconds of my meeting Jill, she's like, do you know Eva? Do you know her work? You should go to her studio. You should check this out. That's a really extraordinary friendship, to have someone who is not just a friend, but who's also an advocate for your practice. And Eva, I've got to say, when you enter your space where you create your work, it is electric. I mean, you walk in there and you want to do nothing but wander. And I think I remember walking through and being fascinated with how you had things tacked to the wall and how you would step on things and just move. And I'm like the art guy, so I'm like, is she really walking on this? But that's part of your practice. It's part of how you create. And I think it would be great if you could just tell people about your process and why that studio space and why it's set up the way that it is, which I also think is really intriguing and cool. And then my favorite part is having Jill Soloway come in the middle of my studio visit, sits there like a baller and is like, so what's going to happen? What are we doing? It's such amazing. It's great.
Well, you cannot also, you know, I have to also add that little Sheldon, Jill's fabulous little dog, was also there.
Oh, that's right. Sheldon was there, walking on paintings, by the way.
Well, of course, everybody's allowed to, invited to walk on the paintings. Well, you know, it's really interesting. It was, I guess, like a couple of months after I met Jill, I was like, you know, there's the TV show, but who's this person? And I'm so fascinated by it. I want to know more. So, of course, like, I'm an OCD type of person. You can see from my work, like, I go deep. So I was like, I gotta listen to everything. So I was like, I had this like, I mean, first of all, I binge watched Transparent. So I was fully in that world, and it really made sense. What made sense the most was this feeling like I was falling into the characters, this thing about feeling. And then I was listening to just a, you know, an interview, a podcast interview that Jill had done. And there was something about Jill describing the process as a director, you know, this sort of sitting into your hips and really letting things unfold and letting the actors kind of live in this sort of, well, you know, sometimes like you're doing something, but I think that the important thing about language is language creates it kind of like sheds light, like it makes something visible, right? So I was doing all these things, but I kept thinking, what is the language? Like how, you know, what do I explain? I'm experiencing this crazy fuck it moment in my studio, but how do I mean, I can't just be like, so Eva, what's your new work about? Fuck it. Like that's not an explanation. So this thing about like sitting in the middle of the painting, like squatting there, like old school. You know, you're sitting there. I mean, is it peeing? Is it tending to plants? Is it like, you know, picking up a baby from the ground? Like it's all of those, right? And it's this like attention and that feeling that directly gets you in the middle of it. And so everything is critically important in terms of attention, because it's not like you can be like hodgepodge about a baby, you're gonna kill it, right? So it's not like, oh, everything goes, Eva just does whatever she wants to in the studio. On the contrary, it's like I have to be ready. I mean, I used to paint a lot. Now it's like, man, a month goes by, nothing has happened, and all of a sudden it's like a huge painting like comes out in the matter of like, you know, 10 14 hours of nonstop work, and then I just like collapse on the floor. So it's really interesting how, you know, this friendship. But you know, I've always been fascinated by sort of the history of these like kind of friendships between poets and composers and writers. And I feel like in our today's world, we're so professional and compartmentalized into our little discrete worlds that like, oh, how can a painter have anything to say or think about music or a movie? And and I think that that's nonsense. I think like what our friendship has meant is this like thing that I've only had gotten to experience in the past, like reading books about people who died like 100 years ago, you know? So anyways.
That's amazing. So Jill, like I love this whole relationship between artists that you talked about in the beginning. So what was it like for you experiencing Eva's practice for the first time?
Yeah, it's really overwhelming. I mean, I think as I've gotten to know Eva, I've come to the conclusion that she's, you know, one of the great artists of our time who's living. She's a living, you know, she's going to be in the history books, and you look at all of the men who have defined particular practices and gotten credit for things. And so for Eva and I going to see Hilma af Klint and seeing everything she was doing before the men who got credit for it, you know, for me and thinking about, you know, the male artists who have defined this kind of abstraction. And by the way, Eva can also paint a perfect portrait, and she can do anything. She has the most amazing art history mind. So she can do anything, but what she's doing is she's kind of, you know, living through the canvas and living through the materials and becoming a whirlwind. I mean, I never watch her work. I don't see her work. It's private. But when I see her work hanging, I can feel how she got there. And strangely, we have a lot in common with how we work. Like we both are constantly always sorting. You know, for me, when I'm directing, I'm sorting emotions. I'm sorting beat changes. So I'm trying to just figure out these moments where the actors go from left to right. You know, when they move from doing one thing they want to another. I'm always talking about playable action. What is the character doing to get what they want? And I'm filming them when they change what they do to get what they want. I'm filming these changes. I'm sorting these emotions. That's what she's doing with her painting. You know, she's sorting out her own emotions by making almost a fingerprint with them, but they're a print of her soul. And yeah, I can't believe it. I mean, it's like, yeah, you know, I know how amazing her mind is, but to be able to see her work, it was like, this is what it's like to encounter her mind. You know, you can see in the paintings what it's like to know her. And they're not just paintings, that, you know, they're really sculptures. And as she moves from the rectangle and I'm moving out of the male gaze, we're both asking the exact same questions. You know, what does it mean to look at a rectangle and judge it as art? and to put, to give it a value and to hang it on the wall. When I'm going, okay, I'm reinventing for me what it feels like to be a female, or I was, born assigned female at birth. I identify as non-binary now, but, spending my life as female and being looked at and placed into photographs and being the object instead of the subject. So this is really true for all people who are otherized. We're first kind of getting over our objectification, and our art is really about how it feels to be not seen. And so if I'm taking the camera, I want the camera to capture all my shame, all my self-hatred, all my worry that I'm not doing it right, because I spent 50 years looking at what men want women to be to get access to white supremacy and patriarchy. And that's what she's doing with her art. She's not just making something to compare with Jackson Pollock and hang next to him. She's rolling around in everything that she was told about what a genius is and expelling, her feelings. So it's if you get to walk into the studio and encounter these pieces, the gigantic ones and the little tiny drawings, Arthur, I remember, and I just want to say, my mom's a PR person, so I come by PR naturally. And it was like year 2 at Frieze, and year 1 at Frieze was my first entry into the art world. And I was like, oh my God, there's all these people I don't know. I can hang out in this world because there's no TV writers. There's a couple, but it's mostly this world that I don't know the rules. I don't know who the best galleries are, and I don't know who the big artists are, and I don't know what anything costs. And I felt all of this frustration a year ago at so much male gaze and so much male art. And I found my favorite artists, and I started collecting art about a year ago. I'm 1 year into like being a collector. And I couldn't go to Frieze this year without hyping Iva and my friend, Fabiana Rodriguez, who was also there. We went to Frieze knowing we're coming to work. We're coming to work. We're going to go. Iva, everybody needs to know that you're here and you're in Los Angeles and you're making stuff. We're coming to Frieze to work. We're going to Felix to work. And it was so fun. And how magical that I got to meet you and that we're here. I mean, it turned out perfectly.
It sure did. I'm pretty happy about that meeting. So well said, Jill. Iva, like in this moment, as an abstract painter, there is so much conversation that can take place about what that means and where you are, to Jill's point, about where you land in the landscape. And your work elicits emotion. You can't help it. You can't help but want to dive in further and just ask you a million questions about how you created something, or even how you thought about putting it in the wall, and how the viewer is supposed to experience it as more of a 3D object instead of this flat surface. Right. So for you as an artist in this moment of, quite honestly, a little bit of chaos mixed with a little bit of terror, like you show up in the world with your work in the most beautiful way with this exceptional language. And I would love for you to just tell everyone what it means for you to be Iva the artist in this moment, creating what you do in your practice.
Well, I mean, okay, so there's a couple of things to say here. I mean, my family came here in 1990, and I remember one of the tragedies of immigration is that all of a sudden you get plopped into a world where you don't know anybody and nobody knows you. And I remembered how I longed to one day be able to say, oh, I've known this person for 15 years. Somebody knows me, because there's something about like different cultures, language differences, practical ways in which, I still do like really funny things. Like when I break an egg, I use my finger to clean the tiny bit of egg that's left in the eggshell. I have this thing about like, scarcity and being really careful. Or for example, in like the 90s, my mom gave me a juice maker so I can make like apple juice. And one of my roommates was like, you're so weird. What are you doing? Because I was making juice, drinking it, and then eating the pulp with a spoon because I couldn't like fathom throwing it away. What I'm trying to get at is like this kind of place of in-betweenness that I've always occupied. I'm neither this nor that, neither here nor there. And it's this place, this liminal place, this in-between place, like that fascinated me, you know, when I was reading philosophy, when I, you know, I love going to parties and finding a corner and just kind of, you know, seeing things from that like in between place, right? There's something about that perspective that's also very challenging, because then you're a little bit illegible, like, or very illegible. So my work has always had this, like, it's not perfectly abstract, because if you look close enough, I remember getting a phone call from a gallery. One of the first things that I sold, I was living in New Orleans, and this gallery sold a painting to a bank, and the painting was called Plain Mutants, a big sunk Plain Mutants, right? A few months later, I was so psyched back then, because, like, yeah, first sale, one of the first sales. I get a call from the art dealer, and she's like, do you have another painting? Because somebody in the boardroom noticed the mutants and the crashing airplanes, and they find that to be inappropriate for sort of the vibe of a bank.
God bless my hometown of New Orleans. Unbelievable.
But I was like, I mean, the title said Plain Mutants, you know, the painting is about like burning airplanes. It was made during like shock and awe. I mean, like, duh, like, it's about like the end of the world. I mean, you bought it, you kept it for 6 months in your boardroom. But so this like way in which the paintings, you know, have these different levels of legibility. There's like that, oh, they're so colorful, they're so beautiful, which is like my little insidious like love of seduction. It's like, yeah, seduce them, bring them in, and then, you know, reveals like a world in turmoil. It reveals like, I mean, a lot of the new drawings that are featured in the artist project are the drawings that I made in the first few weeks of the pandemic, which were just like my hand, like frantically, you know, drawing these like two figures. They're either facing apart, facing each other. So like these questions about like human bodies in relationship to these like large scales, like machines, whether machines of oppression, machines of like distribution of water, food, all these networks that we're infinitely dependent on, which to everybody's like now realization are very frayed, very fragmented, very susceptible to shock, very, you know, tentative. And, you know, that was my experience when I was 14 years old. I don't know where my parents were, but I was alone with my tiny little brother and my other brother. We were watching on television, Ceausescu, he was the leader of the Romanian Communist Party. Our leader had already been removed. He was the last standing like dictator in Eastern Europe. And all of a sudden the electricity went out. And in my mind, I was like, okay, there's a nuclear power plant on the Danube. What if that just blew up? Would I ever see anybody again? You know, it's that memory, and then the memory of the empty grocery stores and the hundreds of thousands of people protesting on the highway, the one highway in Sofia, Bulgaria. So, you know, this thing about like, you know, precarity, human bodies, human relationships, it's like the reality of it is what my paintings are about. So that was a very...
God, you're amazing. Jill and I are both just like, wow. I know, it's incredible. One of my favorite moments in experiencing your practice, Iva, you were in conversation with Donna Nelson and Deborah Grant, and they're both just geniuses, and you rose to the occasion in every way. It was like one of the best curated group shows I'd seen. And that was by Margaret Miller, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I'd love to understand from you, just in the spirit of what Jill started with, lots of artists in conversation with each other. What was it like being in that particular moment with, I mean, especially like Donna Nelson, like that's kind of wild.
Well, so I just want to say Donna Nelson was my date at the premiere of the Transparent musical finale.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yes, and Donna loved Transparent, and she also loved all the amazing, colorful, trans queer people that are Jill's chosen family and now my family. And Donna was like, this is so good for you. This is so good for you. These people, look at their clothes. Look how they're, the energy, it's alive. It's alive. Good for you. So, but back to Donna, okay, so I was in college, I finished college, I studied philosophy. I was a big philosophy nerd. I was gonna go to, continue studying philosophy. And then I was like, what? No, I need to go back to art school, because I had gone to art school in Bulgaria. So somebody told me, this is in Baltimore, I'm sitting in my dorm room, because I had gotten kicked out of my apartment at that point. So I was like kind of squatting in the dorm room with a bunch of freshmen, like the last few weeks of college. So all of a sudden I have this brilliant idea. Oh no, I need to go to graduate school and for painting, right? So I don't know who I call. I always call some friend that I know knows better than me about the world. So I call I don't know, so I called somebody, and that person informed me that indeed in Philadelphia there are art schools. So I hop in the car and I drive to Philadelphia asking strangers where the art schools are. Well, the kind strangers on the streets of Philadelphia directed me to the suburbs, Elkins Park. This is where old Tyler School of Art was, which to my amazement looked just like my dilapidated art school in Bulgaria. It's the same unpainted for decades red brick color. There's no students because school's out and there's nobody around. So I'm walking around, I have these like Polaroid shots of like paintings I had done in my dorm room for my friends, and I'll do puppet shows for them. So it was not even like, anything serious. But I hear this like click, 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 click. And this woman, this beautiful woman, who in my imagination now is like 9 feet tall, that was Donna Nelson. And I'm like, hi, I want to go to art school. She's like, oh, let me see. I showed me Florida. She's like, oh, good. Yeah, you should make a portfolio, move to Philadelphia, and apply to Tyler. Great. and I just listened to whatever she said, did it, and by like some crazy, chance, thanks to, I guess, Stanley Whitney as well, who somehow like thought I was like a perfect weirdo for Tyler. I got accepted, and so Donna Nelson has been this like, and Deborah Grant was in my class. So, first day of school, I meet Trent Doyle Hancock and Deborah Grant and Donna Nelson. I mean, it was an incredible journey. And, Joe has had the privilege of also meeting Trent Doyle at his show at MoCA, and Donna Nelson. And it's just, there's something about like, and I'll end answering this question on this note, but when I went back to graduate school, I had this idea that you had to be old and you had to be a man and you had to paint in oils if you wanted to be a painter. And to have Donna Nelson, be this like model in the world, this amazing painter. I mean, there's so much I owe to her about my relationship to surface, my relationship to process, like that, like unflinching kind of honesty in that moment when you're with the work, where it's like, all this other stuff just kind of goes away. So, Donna Nelson and, Jill, those are kind of like, yeah, my,
I like that. I like that a lot. That's a perfect segue for my question for Jill. Jill, I remember when Transparent aired, and it was such a game changer for all of us in this country, and it changed the way we had conversations. It changed the way that we looked at and accepted people. As someone who, identifies as a gay male, I even had to check some of that and how I engage with other members of the community. I am laughed at all the time because I'm a Gen Xer who struggles with every pronoun that there is. And I remember watching an episode and saying, my God, this is our America, and how cool that we're now having this dialogue and this conversation because of a really brilliant creator. And when I experienced the two of you together in the studio, I personally got very excited because I do think that that creative energy brings out other things in your artist counterparts. So I hinted at the beginning that we were going to talk about this a little bit, but Jill actually names some of Iva's works, which is why I made that segue. So I'd love, Jill, just for you to just talk about what that means for you to be entrusted with doing that, and then just share a little bit of that genius mind of yours and how you create some of this.
Well, I mean, I feel kind of like guilty, and like I'm not really supposed to be doing it. Like I feel very naughty being the namer of the paintings that aren't even mine and that I haven't really spent any time with. But Iva says it makes her happy, so I keep doing it. I love naming things. I'm not a big namer of paintings, but I love coming up with names. Like that's one of my favorite things to do is to name new companies or brands. So yeah, if anybody wants to talk about starting like a think tank later where I just come up with names, that's my path. But I'm very like innocent about art. I don't know a lot about it. I feel like a fool. I'm responding from my gut. What do I love? What do I want to live with? And again, like last year's freeze, it's been about 1 year where I've been thinking of myself as somebody who even has the right to walk into a gallery and have an opinion about anything, you know? But we went to see Hilma af Klint together, and Iva kind of taught me how to look at art. Cause you know, I've really been faking it all this time. I'll go on a date with somebody to a gallery. I'll stand in front of the painting with my hands on my hips. And then you're like, I need to come up with something to say now, right? You know, I did move on to the next thing. I need to say something about this painting. And Iva taught me like how to look at art without needing to come up with anything to say, but instead how to just kind of relax your body, relax your eyes, relax your jaw, get into your sort of parasympathetic nervous system, and be in front of the painting. What a beautiful gift she gave me. Like you don't have to say anything, you just have to be in front of it and then let the feelings come up. And if you want to talk about them, great. If you don't, also great. And it's a very similar thing I use when I'm directing. I'm not thinking, ooh, I have to get this shot like this. I'm relaxing my eyes, relaxing my jaws, trying to witness the scene as it unfolds and respond emotionally. So it's very familiar, but I've never done it with art. So anyway, she taught me how to look at art. That's what I do. So she texts them to me. I kind of look at it. I kind of blur. And then the first words that come out of, I just text them right back to her in a few seconds. So it's sort of what I see. And again, I'm embarrassed to do it because I see something so strongly. I'll look at her painting and I'll be like, holy shit, that's somebody who just got to the top of a mountain. And then I'll text her back, made it. And didn't we call one Made It? Yeah. Yes. And I feel bad because it's like what I see and I don't want it to only be what I see. But yeah, that's kind of like, what is the emotion and what would I say upon feeling the emotion, you know?
I love that. Well, we have over 200 guests, believe it or not, who are watching this, and they have some questions. So we're going to segue a little bit, and we have someone who's raised their hand who would like to ask a question. Did that not work out? Okay, so I'll read the question. Here we go. Oh, of course, it's from a friend of mine, Joseph. So Joseph wanted to understand, Iva, a little bit more about what either means in abstract versus representational, and if that's important to collectors or galleries, but not necessarily for you. That's a very Joseph question, by the way.
Well, again, it's this, I feel like it's always this pendulum, right? Like it is helpful to galleries. It is helpful to collectors to have the words. It's like what Jill was saying, which is like, we're so expected to respond and always to respond in the right way with the right terminology, because like we live in this world of branding and so on. But like, I think a painting, standing in front of a painting or sculpture, it's really like this sort of like moment of surrender when you're actually willing to engage with another human being. You know, you cannot immediately judge them in every way. You have to sort of let them be, right? So this thing about like abstraction and figuration, or abstraction and representation, I think like my work is like kind of like non-objective in the sense that they're not meant to be read as like, oh, here's the information, like the way you read or try to read a billboard or some other kind of information source. They're more meant as these kind of like visual journeys that unfold over time, and they change in response to the viewer. So it's this conversation, and yes, there's like moments when you're like, oh, I mean, you know, for example, like in the recent works, like there's drawings that are very clearly kind of cartoony, funny, caricature-y sort of, you know, self-portrait / like, you know, comments on, you know, political or cultural issues, right? So all of that is present, like the figurative is present, the narrative is present, but also abstraction allows, for me, abstraction is like a place for formal invention. Does that make sense? Where I'm not like bound to like some kind of history of representation. I am just, you know, free to respond to like the movement of the wet paint as like I make a cut and then just it seeps from behind, and then the paint is behind the surface and then starts to bleed as I step on it. You know, there's all these moments that like unfold in time. And I think some of that gets captured by the surface and then becomes almost like revealed backwards or in a similar way for the viewer. So it's this interesting way, which I feel like, and I think that's the overlap too, why I've always loved films. Like I remember people be like, what's your favorite painter? And you're like, movies? But, you know, there's something about like this, it's a similar thing, like painting is static, right? Movies are motion pictures, right? We call them motion pictures, but there's plenty of motion in a painting, and there's plenty of ambience or kind of like static feeling in film. So these distinctions always kind of frustrate me because I think they create a kind of impediment to people's ability to just, you know, let themselves be in the presence of something that somebody else made. I mean, that was the one thing that this moment of pandemic actually, you know, this kind of super jarring thing that we're all going through. I left my, you know, the studio the other night, and I was just like, that's it. I'll never judge anything again. It's just a pure, like just the fact that somebody somewhere somehow made something, just even the thought of that gives me so much joy that like, who cares about what's bad or good or figurative or representation? It's like, there's something so miraculous about a human being making something, you know, not to get like sentimental on this, but it is kind of.
I like that. Iva, you have some blasts from your past reaching out for questions. So Terry Myers has a question.
Oh, hi, Terry.
If we can make Terry live for a sec.
He was the first official art person I've ever met.
And there's Terry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Eva.
Hi.
Good to see you. Hello, everyone. So I first met Eva when I was one of the 3 jurors of the Louisiana exhibition, the biennial in New Orleans. And with Valerie Cassell, Oliver, and Odile Donald Odita, we were the 3 jurors. And I remember walking into your studio. That was pre-Katrina, and Katrina's sort of in my question here. And I knew about Tyler, of course, and having visited Tyler when I started my career in New York in the early 90s, it is this amazing place because you got through Stanley, Whitney, through Donna, you got like New Yorkified on a certain level, but you were able to resist it too.
Right.
And the gesture, that you were so smart that you didn't end up in New York. And then I thought, wow, it's so cool she's in New Orleans.
Well,
Because,
it sounds like New York, but it's New Orleans.
yeah, but it's so cool. I mean, I remember all three of us just being like, wow, this woman is down here making these amazing big paintings, like doing what you were doing. And it wouldn't have worked in New York in some ways. But my main question is, well, then of course, Katrina, I don't know if you want to talk about, you know,
Sure.
you lost your studio, and then you end up here, and you ended up coming to the place, LA's art world has had a different relationship to boundaries than any other place in contemporary art since the late 19th century. I mean, like, most people think it's like Ferris Gallery in the 50s, but you can go back to the late 1800s and you could see the seeds for a kind of, New York is so boundary caught up. Donald Judd being like, my way or the highway. Like, if you're this, you can't be that. Here, Billy Al Bankston could surf in the morning, work on his motorcycle, go to his studio and hang out with Ed Ruscha and Frank Gehry and Cameron and, Wallace Berman, and that there's a different ethos here. But what's so interesting to me is, having known your work all these years, and this is what I want you to respond to, is what the work is actually doing materially and in painting, even as you've expanded the support and everything, that there really isn't anyone like you out here. And I know a lot about painting. There's really no one like you out here. Do you agree? And if so, if you don't agree, what do you think about what I just said? Am I being too bold?
No. Well, it's interesting because, like, in many ways though, there's like, actually, like, my heroes are here, like Noah Purifoy and his like outdoor sculptures in New Orleans. I mean, I had a full-blown anxiety attack when I first went there, like, 9 years ago. There's these sculptures made for the sun and for the wind and the tattered and like they're wild, and they're about like everything from, slavery to loneliness to why the fuck do you make art in the first place, right? So also, Jay DeFeo, like one of my favorite, painters, like she's from, she painted in California, in the San Francisco area. And, Philip Guston and Pollock, they are both from Southern California. They went to high school in Southern California. So there's something, I think, about California that's attracted me, or it made sense, even though my decision had no rational reasons. The only reason I moved to Los Angeles is because I wanted to leave the humidity of New Orleans, because I was very ill. I'm not going to get into that, but I was very, very ill and thought I was going to die, and nobody could figure out what was wrong with me. And basically I looked at the map and it was like, shoot, there's a city called Los Angeles in the desert where they make movies, and then there's New York, where I know a few people. And then basically I allowed the dog to decide. And when I looked into her eyes, she said Southern California, because there's mountains. And when I got here, I was like, oh my God, this is perfect, because Sofia, where I grew up, is also surrounded by mountains and, lots of pollution. So Los Angeles is kind of a perfect mixture, where it's again, that liminal space. You go to San Francisco, you go to New York, you have this sense that, like, everybody's got their pie, they're all eating it, you're out. There's no space for anybody. But here it's like, I'm in my studio, I'm working on a painting at 2 in the morning, I hear drumming outside. My studio is like, it was on the edge, now it's on the edge of a park, but it used to be like a kind of one of those highly polluted areas, of Los Angeles, and now it's turned into a park. But I go out there and there's like a bonfire and about 100 people performing a bear ceremony in the middle of the night, with like, 20 drummers, and, they welcome me into the circle. And there I am, like, in the middle of like the city of Los Angeles. I am like experiencing an American Indian bear ceremony with a giant bonfire. I mean, like, that would never happen in New York. And so I think that that thing about space, or that, like, again, that in between, that thing where like the narratives have not been finished up, like the rules have not been like set in stone. I mean, that's the thing about, I love about, you know, this painting here too, is like that loneliness, that, like, you know, space, that like you can really easily disappear and then, you know, kind of pop back out. But there's something about also the history here of like the kind of dream of Los Angeles, like this you know, oasis in the desert, but it's a oasis that is unsustainable, that is like the result of, you know, turning the Owens Valley into a desert. And, you know, just like this history of like kind of human folly and violence and beauty, and that intense light that kind of blinds the edges of things. It's just, it's really like things are both surreal and raw, both real and virtual. Kind of like, you know, the place where we're all existing right now during this pandemic.
I love that. All right, Jill, we have 2 live questions from you. One is from Blair Cohen.
Great.
Blair?
I didn't realize I was actually talking. Oh, there it is. I'm really drawn to this painting. I, like Jill, don't feel like I have any expertise in speaking about art. So I relaxed my eyes and my jaw and looked at this, and it intrigued me. And number one, I want to know if Jill named it, and if so, what did you name it? And number two, what inspired it?
Is it the one that's up on the screen right now?
It's the cast painting, yeah.
Well, this particular one is actually not one that Joe named, because this was a series of drawings I made during last year's lockdown, for me, personal lockdown, because I broke my foot, and the various doctors kept saying, "Oh, honey, you're so unlucky." Apparently it was like, I broke the one bone you don't want to break in your foot. So I was stuck with a giant cast, like, you know, high up in the air for 6 weeks, and made these drawings. So those are the cast series. But if you want to pick another one and ask Joe.
And then, Jill, we have one more question here from Marissa. And Marissa, I'm going to take you live in just, Misha, I'm sorry, Misha Lambert. Misha, are you there?
Hi.
Hi.
What's your question for Jill?
So Jill, I'm inspired by your friendship and your creative collaboratorship with Iva. And I'm a queer creator in my mid-20s, and in my community, a lot of us are at the very beginning of our creative lives. And with this kind of impending doom and this precarious moment that we're in, we're freaking out a little bit, because we want to create things that might actually see the light of day sometime soon. So I guess my question is, what would you advise us to do to keep our community and to just keep our creative juices alive and flowing? How do we kind of get together and keep making things right now?
I see this as a moment where, you know, quite simply, goddess consciousness is calling us to come into a place where the simple idea of living a life of love can matter more than all this other stuff, the war and the power and the pollution and the hatred and the television. So I'm really feeling like it's actually a great time to not worry so much about community, but to give yourself real permission to go to your risk spaces and remind yourself that, you know, no one's coming over and you have nowhere to go. And so take all your materials and materials you never thought of, whether you're a filmmaker, a sculptor, a writer, and, you know, let Iva inspire you, you know, roll around in it. Nobody has to see it. Write stuff that will never see the light of day. Make a sculpture that nobody will ever see. Use this space around your time, knowing you're never going to have it again, ever. We're never going to, there will be there will be a cure for it. There will be a vaccination for it, and we'll go back to something like regular life, maybe in 2 years, maybe in 1 year, maybe in 3 years. In the meantime, a lot of people are calling it the corona clarity. It's just you and your work. So I think this is a great time to really develop who you are as an artist, and rename yourself and your practice over and over and over again. And make the best use of it that you can.
Oh.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, because I think that there's something about, like, when these past few years until, meeting Arthur and these, opportunities have shown up, it was kind of the first time in a long time that I've had 3 years to just make for no purpose whatsoever. I had no shows planned, intended. And at this point, there's something about, like, when you're creating without this kind of need, where the need really is in the work. And one other thing that has helped me in the past, like, few years is collaboration with others. Like, whether it's like asking a friend, hey, what do you want me to draw? Tell me what to draw and I'll draw it for you and send it to you. Just like these like, sometimes when you make something with somebody else's desire in mind, but not as a professional thing, it's not to benefit you or some kind of idea of a career, but it really is about that conversation. I think it's very helpful.
Oh, so you two are just incredible. I know one of the things that's happened for me during this period, other than just missing my friends and missing a social life, is I've grown much closer to a few people just through phone conversation and getting to know each other. And I noticed something yesterday that I wasn't even conscious of, that it actually started taking place. And it's that every conversation was ending with, I love you.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems so simple. And I don't think I really thought about what that actually meant, to say that to someone, or to hear someone say that back to me and mean it in a way that I probably didn't hear it before. Yeah. And I find that those friendships are the things that sustain you the most when you're having those trying, quiet times of introspection. And what I observe in the two of you is this very natural support system that almost feels magical, like you're tethered to each other, and that you allow each other safe space to be who you are and create. But then I can see the influence that you have in each other in your work. So just to wrap up, I'm going to put you two on the spot, and I'd like to talk about what your friendship means to each other. So Jill, we'll start with you. And you've been so gracious to talk about Iva's practice and shared her genius with me and the world in this scenario. But we really like to hear, like, what does Iva mean to you?
She's sort of like about a space and a time where like she comes over and we social distance in my garden now, and I'm learning how to plant things and grow them. And so she kind of brings her way of being out of time. She's not in time, she's out of time. So then when she's around, we're in this other time. We're not in Los Angeles. We're not on Tuesday at 3. We're in this other time. We're like, are we those people who hung around with Hilma af Klint, and one day in the future they're going to look back at these women or these non-binary people who, like, it makes me feel like we're living in history together. That she reminds me a lot of one of my first partners, Peter, somebody I was in a relationship with, who was just very present, and he lived as if he just lived in a way that felt very real. So it's like kind of pretending we're artists, pretending we matter, getting out of the insecurity of, well, what if, there's no like, should this be on Facebook, or it's just presence. It's pure presence and life as art. So yeah, she's a huge influence on me. She makes me, when I'm around her, I have to be the person I want to be. And that's a cute gift.
Wow.
Yeah, that's that's how I feel too. It's like time disappears, and whether we're in like, you know, Sofia, Bulgaria, which we got to go. Joe got to see where I grew up, which was crazy. And it was also like, I call that existential lasagna, where like all of a sudden these like moments of synchronicity, like what, Joe's filming a movie where? In Sofia, but not like just, you know, a single bus stop away from where I spent like my whole childhood, like hanging upside down from a tree pretending to be a monkey, you know, at age like 12, a little delayed in my development. But there's something about this, like, you know, when a friendship is so, it's like a twirl. It reminds me of another fantasy I had when I was a kid, like where I was obsessed with finding Baba Yaga's house. She's like that witch with like that has a house on like chicken feet, and we're the two kids, and we're always looking for Baba Yaga's house. And like these like adventures are about around this like kind of an impossible object, and therefore it's becomes about the adventure. And so, and I really love that because I don't know, there's something about like Jill that makes me feel safe in the world. And so thank you.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, thank you both for spending this hour with us. And there are so many questions that we didn't get to, so I apologize to everyone. We could probably have gone another hour with just your questions, but I appreciate everyone spending time with us today in conversation with Iva and Jill. And just as we maneuver through these next couple of weeks and months, I hope that this friendship that you've just witnessed inspires you to be kind to each other and to discover the value of true friendship and support, because this is the definition of what it looks like. Thank you so much, ladies, for your time.
Thank you, Arthur. You're so cool.
I try to be. I'm trying to be like Jill.
And thank you, everyone in UTA. You've made this experience so incredible, and I feel so supported. And, you know, it was lonely those 3 years out in the world on my own. So I'm very grateful for everything. And thank you, Jill.
I'm so proud to be represented by UTA in this moment.
Yay.
Being in this conversation, which is one of my favorite things I've done as an artist and as a professional, that it can be through UTA, and that I can, you know, bring this kind of feeling into this professional relationship. It's a huge gift.
Jill, please keep it up. You're changing the world and changing conversation, and ultimately we see it. It's incredible. It's really incredible. Iva, big things to come.
Woo!
All right, everyone. Take care. Thank you.
Okay, everybody stay safe and lots of love.
Stay safe.